All right, so we have the HTML structure. Now let's set up JavaScript functionality where once the index HTML loads, then we're fetching the product from the URLs that I talked about it earlier. So once we navigate to index.js, we can notice that there are a few imports. So we have fetch products, import that is coming from the fetch products module, setup store, display, as well as get element. And first thing that I would want to do is set up a function that runs once the page loads. And we already know that we would set up such a function on a window. Then we can add event listener, and I'm listening for DOM and then content loaded. So once the DOM content loaded, then I would want to run my callback function, which in this case is going to be a reference to my init function, which at the moment is not there. So then I'm going to go with const and I'm going to create that function. Now I'll right away set this up as a sync function. Why? Because I already know that we'll perform a fetch request, and it's very nice if I can set up my async await syntax, since in my opinion, it's just easier to read. So I'm setting up my arrow function. It is right away async await. And then in order to fetch the product, of course, I'll use my fetch product function. And I'll right away use const and then products. This will be async await, meaning the fetch product is also going to be async await. So I know that I'm going to be returning a promise. So I'll say await. And then, of course, let's invoke fetch product. Now, at the moment, there's nothing in the fetch product. And of course, we would want to change that. So first, we'll save it. Now, it's not going to make much sense since nothing is happening here in the fetch product. But in order to set up that functionality, of course, we would need to navigate to fetch products, correct? Then at the moment, I have already imported the URL. Remember the one that's coming from the utils, where I can see all the products. I have all product URL and I have single product. So single product will take care of the single page. But in this case, I would want to get all the products. So in my fetch products, I'm importing this URL. Like I said, it is a right away async await function. And now, of course, we already know that we just need to perform a fetch request, correct? So I'm going to go with const and I'll call this a response. And that is equal to my await, since I can use it. And by the way, I misspelled const. That's why I have the error over here. And I'll close the sidebar. Now we're going for fetch. We'll pass in the URL. So we go with all product URL. And right away, since I have that done, I'll add catch. I'll say, you know what? If there is an error, then please console log it in the console. So I'm going to go with error, of course. And now, of course, if I would want, I can just see what is going to be my response. And for the time being, I'll just return the response. Now, there's a little bit more functionality that I'm going to do, but for the time being, I'll just return the response. So I'm console logging when I'm getting back and also returning. And remember, in the index, I right away wait for my promise, because remember, if it's a sync function, by default, it will always return a promise. So this response is wrapped in a promise. And now in the index.js, I'm just waiting for it. And of course, I can console log it here as well. But you know what? I did it over here in the fetch product. So now let's navigate to a bigger page, to homepage. And in here, I still have the loading. But if I check in a console, there is my response. Beautiful. So I get something. Now, if the response is there, then I would want to run the JSON. Because remember, that was necessary if we wanted to read what we're getting back, correct? We needed to turn this into a JSON. However, there's also going to be a case if, for example, something goes wrong. So then, of course, this catch is going to work. And then if that is the case, then this one will be undefined. Because at the moment, yes, there's something there, but there's also going to be undefined option as well. And in order to showcase that, if I navigate to a utils, and then if I'll add one more S, notice right now, you'll get this undefined. And it's going to say type error, failed to fetch. So we need to take care of that as well. So in the fetch products, yeah, I'm going to return a response, but if the response is successful, then I would want to turn it into a JSON. So in here, I'm going to say if the response is successful, then I would want to return response, and then right away, let's run the JSON. So what's happening right now, if it is unsuccessful, then I'm still going to get these errors. Okay, good. But if it is successful, then I'm returning response JSON. So now make sure that my URL is correct. And now in the index.js, I'm going to be able to access the products. So right after fetch products, well, right after I'm waiting for them, I'm going to get my products, and you'll see that I have my array because, of course, everything is successful. So again, we're fetching for all the products. We're making sure that if there's an error, we at least console logging, and we only run JSON if this is a success. If it's not, then we're just returning this one. And of course, we will handle this eventually in the index.js as well. And what we're seeing right now is big array. Like I said, at the moment you're watching this, this is 9, but probably by the time you're watching this, or I'm sorry, by the time you're working on your project, you'll probably have more. So we have array of 9 items. Each item is an object. And then in the object, I have 2 properties. I have one for fields and then one for ID. And then in the fields, I have property for the colors, company, featured, image. And like I said, I purposely made this a little bit more complicated, where I didn't want all the properties nicely sitting side by side, because that's not going to be a real world. In a real world, you will get these nested structures, and you'll have to figure out how to get that one specific property or the value. Because notice, even for the image is an array. And then in that array, I'm actually looking for the thumbnails, and then eventually I would want to get this large one. So I purposely added these hops where it's not just basic, yeah, get me the image property. Because, like I already have probably said 30,000 times, that's not how the APIs are structured in the real world. So even though you could argue that why for this project the API structure is somewhat difficult, well, the simple answer is because I would want you to get training on how to destructure and access properties in a more complicated API than just a API that sends back an object and all the properties are sitting nicely one next to each other. Awesome. So we were able to fetch our products. We took care of the error. So if there is an error, we're not running the JSON, we're only running the JSON if the response is success. And now with that in mind, I would want to set up my store as well.